My name is Ulrik. I'm a pricing consultant. Well, I work only with B2B SaaS and I work primarily with heavier solutions. So what I'm going to share with you today is some key concepts that I have picked up along the way on how to do packaging for these types of solutions. So we're going to start the webinar on B2B SaaS packaging, the first of 6 webinars. So it's a series that I've decided to do a little bit as an experiment in the format here. I'm very happy to see that we have, closing in on 100 people joining us. I know that some of you are joining from the US. So thank you for getting up early. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk for half an hour or so. And then for the next half hour, I'm going to take questions, so open Q&A. And I think the way that Riverside works is that I'm not going to be able to allow people to speak. So we're going to have to use the chat over here. So, but you have time to formulate the question. That also means that you can actually sort of write the question out as the webinar goes along, sort of the first half hour, and then I'll get to it after. For those of you that do not know me, my name is Ulrik. I'm a pricing consultant. I work only with B2B SaaS, and I work primarily with heavier solutions. So technically complicated, more expensive enterprise software type solutions. And I've done over 100 projects in the space, maybe even over 150 for the past decade or so. So what I'm going to share with you today is some key concepts that I have picked up along the way on how to do packaging for these types of solutions. And hopefully they're gonna individually make sense, but also as a whole form like a process that is useful for you. There might be better ways to do this, but this is what works for me and has worked for my clients. So I'll run through these 6 key concepts one at a time, trying to sort of build them one on each other. Then I'm gonna, at the end, sort of demo how I do sketch packaging. Sometimes it's just like seeing is believing. So just like figure out, okay, so that's actually how it looks like when I sketch out packaging. And then we're going to have hopefully sort of 20 minutes for Q&A at the end. Let's just start it off. Concept number 1 is when you're doing packaging for B2B SaaS and principle for anything else, any other product, the idea is actually to not package in order to price the product, but in order to price the customer. And the best analogy that I've found to explain this is trains. So trains, just like software, has this feature where it costs a lot to build the solution. While you're building it, you cannot earn revenue. But once built, it costs almost nothing to deliver value to the customer. So transporting the customer has 0 or very marginal cost, while building the railroad has tremendous upfront cost. So that also means that it isn't clear immediately when we're trying to price a train ticket or software, what is the profitable price? If we're manufacturing widgets and selling them, and we manufacture them for $1, selling them for $2 is a 50% margin. So that makes sense. So a cost plus world makes sense when we're doing a lot of transactional pricing where there's a lot of cost in the delivery. But when we're doing software, the picture changes a little bit. And it rather becomes this question of how do we monetize the market in the best possible way? So I'll try to flip up the solution here and then show you this. So any market is going to be constructed with several different types of customers. Some will have a higher willingness to pay, some will have a medium willingness to pay, and some will have a lower willingness to pay. So this is essentially a demand curve or anything that you have in the sort. And if you have a train and you say, hey, I want to monetize this solution as I bring it to market, and you come up with a price, whatever that price is probably going to be correct or optimal for some customers. So if you charge $10 for the train ticket, then some customers are, optimally priced where they would pay just the $10, they wouldn't pay 11, but they are willing to pay the 10. So that's great. But given that, you probably also have customers that are willing to pay the $10, but you have an invisible loss on those customers as they are willing to pay 20, right? So they would actually pay more. You're just not charging them the more, you're just charging them the 10, right? So you're implicitly losing out on the monetization potential you have for those customers because you're under monetizing. Conversely, on the other end of your market, you have a very visible loss in the customers that are only willing to pay 5 and are not buying your solution. So they will tell you, they will be very vocal. They will say, hey, it's too expensive. We want a lower price. We would buy at 5. We will not buy at 10, all that. But it is also sort of an opportunity cost type loss. And what happens here is that two things. One is that the information that you're getting as a provider is what I call asymmetrical. So the people who think it's too expensive, they will voice it and tell you, while the people who thinks it's actually quite cheap will not voice it and not tell you. So you only have one side of the narrative here, which usually means that software companies tend to have too low a price because they listen to and over-index on the people who tell them that it's too expensive. On the other hand, what's going on here is that this way of looking at a pricing problem is implicitly to look at it as an optimization problem, to say, okay, so if we charge $5 in this market, we will make 15. Like we will sell to everyone, but we will only make 5, 5, and 5. If we charge $10, we will sell to sort of 2 out of the 3 customers who will make 20. That's better. Now we optimize the price. And if we sold to just the one customer 20, we'll still make 20. So here we're sort of flat. So the pricing isn't going to give us anything new. This is sort of a specific way to look at the pricing that actually misses, I think, the larger point, which is that with good packaging, you actually get to charge each customer individually what they're willing to pay. So, for example, with the train, instead of just having a ticket, you say, hey, we're going to divide this into first, second, and third class tickets, and we're going to charge these customers different amounts, right? So the idea now is that you actually get to charge both 5, 10, and 20 for a combined 35 in this market. So the idea is that you should always, whenever you're having a pricing problem, step back and say, it probably isn't the price point. It's not the 10 that should turn into a 9 or an 11. Rather, I should consider this a structural problem and saying, do I have the right structure in place to monetize my market properly? Because the money really is in the structure, and the price point is almost just is an afterthought when you have the right structure. So yeah, and I bring this picture in here because this is how the third class was actually packaged back when they did the transcontinental railroad across the continental US. So the real historical issue was that the railroad tycoons couldn't sell any second class tickets. So what they did was that, because everybody just wanted the cheap ticket, so everybody would just buy the third class ticket, and then the second class would be half empty. First class was fine because all the rich people were buying that. They wouldn't go anywhere near the third class passengers. So they had this sort of problem with under monetizing the second class until they took the roof off of the third class wagon, which created this scenario where 10% of the passengers froze to death when they would ride over the Kentucky mountains. And that actually made customers upgrade to second class who could afford it. So a little bit of brutal capitalist history that sort of showcases some of the dynamics of how packaging can work. And I think actually with this and also with a lot of software solutions and founders and tech teams I work with, actually designing the lower end of the packaging can be the harder part, because most people build a railroad with the first class in mind, right? Nobody thinks that, we're going to blast through the mountains and, take you across the prairie to the frontier in the West. And then we're going to do it in a really crappy way with a low service. Like, most people invent and innovate solutions with maximal value in mind. So the first class usually can sometimes be a little easier to innovate and conceptualize, where the third class, like really thin slicing the outcomes and the jobs that the market has, can actually be a little bit harder. So the way to think about this is that when you have a railroad and then you want to price the customer, is actually say, okay, so first make an inventory of what you can do. So the railroad takes people from A to B. Then the first step of packaging actually is to do what I call fencing. That is to get very clear on whether you're serving one market or several. In the case of railroads, you're serving several because you're serving both passenger and freight. They're very different. They need different packaging, and ultimately they will need different pricing. So you do fencing first, and then you do packaging later. I have an example here of fencing. This is actually a screenshot from this morning from the Zoom pricing page. As you see here, they have plans and pricing for business and personal and education and healthcare and developer, meaning that they have identified that developers need a very different access and packaging and pricing for Zoom than do businesses. So what they have done is they have simply taken and created pricing and packaging schemes for each of these 5 fences and then done those individually. Laddering is this concept of the first, second, and third class, where laddering is the sequence where we stack different value propositions on top of each other. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. But the idea here is that we get to California as the first outcome that we solve for. And then that is separate from also selling the market, getting there alive. And just the fact that there might be a segment that prefers one but not the other is an insight that we use to do packaging. And then getting there in style, let's say that's the outcome that we solve for the first class here. So laddering is the structure of the packaging as a sequence of outcomes that stack on top of each other to build the value. So don't price your product, price your customer. Okay, that was the longest of the key concepts here. So the second is what I call the complexity budget. And complexity budget is essentially my argument against this trope in pricing that, pricing should just be super simple. I don't think that's true. I think pricing should match the complexity that you have in the sale. And it's just to say that if you have a sale for $1 million, you need quite a lot of complexity. You need modules, add-ons, tiering platform, whatever. There's a lot of SKUs and a lot of moving parts in the packaging, and probably also in the pricing with several pricing metrics and so forth. But if you sell something for $100 a year, then you need much less complexity. So complexity is actually a factor that plays into the price point overall and has to support that price point rather than just trying to solve for making it as simple as possible. So I have this very simple schematic where I just put in like rough ranges for annual contract value, let's say below 1,000, between 1K and 25K and so forth. And then my estimate of what kind of pricing and packaging is correct for these different levels, where, if you have something that sells for 100K plus, on the packaging side, you need complex configurability, bespoke packaging, sort of sometimes bespoke solutions, and a very advanced service catalog where, if you sell something for 10K, you need a very simple tiered model, maybe 1 or 2 add-ons, and maybe services, but maybe not. So the complexity budget is something that we solve for in order to make the, let's say, solution heavy enough, but not too heavy. Concept number 3. This is the concept that I think drives most of the design work when I do packaging. And I call it one job for every package, one package for every job. I'm going to illustrate this one with a case. The case being Bäumer Group. This is a large global logistics solution provider. They provide all the machinery and the iron that sort of runs luggage systems inside airports and large e-commerce facilities and so forth. They do Deutsche Post, for example. And they had a product, a data analytics product that was that they were trying to sell sort of as essentially like a software add-on on top of their machinery, especially to airports. And they had been in the market with this for a little under a year, and they have had very little success. So they had sold 1 or 2 pilots, but nowhere near any of the commercial targets that they had for this solution. And it was a sort of a big bet for Bäumer Group. And this was their original packaging, which is a very straightforward sort of machine learning AI type packaging. This is maybe 5 years ago. But it basically was, the data in tier 1, we're just going to take the data out in the describe package and show it to you. Then the next package, we're going to, interpret what it means. And then in the third package, we're going to predict what happens next inside your system. And then in the fourth package, you can run different simulations and scenarios in order to optimize your solution. And we'll tell you in which direction to go. Should you add more headcount? Should you remove it? Should you open up a new terminal? All these things that are important whenever you are running large logistics facilities. So what had happened in their process was that none of their customers really understood what these packages were. Like They understood it from a technical perspective. Okay, so I get the data, but then they had to sort of interpret, okay, what do I then use that for? How do I generate value out of diagnose? And what really is the difference between diagnose and predict? And what kind of use cases can I run? And they were just like running in circles around this. And to make matters worse, they were running in circles around this across 3 different types of stakeholders, which was the maintenance division, the operations divisions, and management division. And each of these types of stakeholders actually wanted different versions of the solution. So maintenance wanted predictive maintenance. Operations, they just wanted to describe, they just wanted the data out of the system, and then they knew what to do with it. And management actually wanted prescribed, so they wanted the simulation and the scenarios and so forth. So what they were considering was, which I see a lot of heavier enterprise software consider, and sometimes they make an error of it, is actually to split the solution into bits and pieces. Where I say, okay, so we'll just let maintenance choose whatever they want, and operations choose whatever they want, and management choose whatever they want. And the problem is that you now get a lot of configurability and feature toggle ability, where before you had 4 solutions: describe, diagnose, predict, and prescribe. But now you actually have 64 combinations of solutions, because maintenance has a choice of 4 solutions, operations has a choice of 4 solutions, and so forth. So it's 4 times 4 times 4. And that actually creates very heavy, hard to maintain, lots of technical debt, and lots of different customer relationships, because now instead of having 1 customer relationship, you actually need to have 3, 1 in maintenance, 1 in operations, and you need to sort of referee the relationship between these as well. So it's just very heavy, and usually these things break down and slow down. So I asked this question, say, what is the point of first demand? What are they looking for first when they're reaching out to you? And the answer was very clear, which was, oh, they're looking for predictive maintenance. That's definitely the first conversation we have. And then we start to talk about operations and so forth. We say, okay, great. So if maintenance is a very clear source of demand, that also tells me that we probably should just package around that in the following way, saying, how about we flip it and just say, maintenance is a job. And in a sense, they have already told you, right? Because they have a division called maintenance. They have a maintenance budget. They care about maintenance. They have maintenance KPIs and so forth. So we can actually package in the following way, where we say, hey, we just have a package called maintenance, and then we have one called operations, and then we have one called management. And then whatever we can do to solve maintenance, we'll put into the first one. And then whatever we have to do to solve operations, we'll put into the second one. But this is very distinctly different from a traditional good, better, best packaging, because we're not taking, as we are here, and having a solution, a tool, and then creating less good versions of it, which is essentially what you're doing good, better, best. Instead, what we're doing is we're having a very specific point of view on the customer, trying to identify the sources of demand they have for the kinds of outcomes they want. And then we're packaging around those outcomes and saying, we can deliver that. This also creates very robust packaging, in the sense that with this packaging, whenever a product comes up with a new feature, they will know where to put this. So they'll say, oh, this is a maintenance feature. Is it an operations feature? Is it whatever it is? Then it goes there. And you just increase the features in that package, as opposed to spinning it out in new add-ons and so forth. Also, sales are now able to narrate this packaging very well to the customers, right? So it's much easier to talk for sales about maintenance and maintenance outcomes and then price that, than it is to talk about prescription and prescription outcomes, because that's just a base that you then have to build a use case from. So my definition of a job to be done is a desirable outcome that is being chased by demand, like something the customer wants and they have money and activity chasing that outcome that they want. Package around those. Concept 4, point of first demand. We already touched upon it, but I want to drill down on this one. So the question here is, okay, so we have the different jobs: maintenance, operations, management. But why in that order? Like, why not operations, maintenance, management, or management, operations, maintenance? What determines the sequence? And my take on this is that just try and make it easy for yourself. Just figure out where the most attention is in the market. And it can be in 2 ways. Either it is something needs to happen before something else happens. So then there's a causal chain of events, and you just start at the beginning and you start to solve that. Or there's just more attention in the market around a certain thing, and then you sell that first. So if we have the trains example, you can say, well, get to California is where that's what you tell the market. So essentially it is like you market get to California, you don't market like the intricacies of getting there alive or getting there in style. But the whole volume of attention in the marketplace is around going to California. Then once they get into the funnel and they buy a train ticket, they will upsell to the next train tickets. For this one's maintenance needed to happen before operations, because without good maintenance, operations would break down anyways. So you needed to have a very solid technical foundation on the maintenance before you could start to optimize the operations. So it's usually sort of the point of first demand is figure out where the attention or the causal chain starts, solve for that in a package, and then ask, when fully solved, what concern or problem will my customer have next? And that then becomes the next problem. And then you can ask it again, and if solved, what will happen next? What will the concern be? And then that moves on. And this actually creates what I call an expansion axis, which is the fifth concept. So the expansion axis is that you have these different jobs, and maybe you have more different jobs than would reasonably be something you could package for. Maybe you have 10 jobs you solve, but the complexity budget says that you should probably stick with 3. So you have to choose, which also means that you now have a choice in your packaging of which direction to pull it. So let me give you an example here. This is packaging from Contract Book, which I did pricing. This is a Series B startup in Denmark. I did their pricing a few years back. So this is an old pricing page, but it follows this concept where the core, this is a contract management system, is to manage the entire life cycle of a contract in a single streamlined workflow. So essentially the basic package is a contract management system. So everything that the customer is looking for is there. So it's not like we have a light version and a heavy version. It's just that point of first demand solved. Then we're saying, what will happen next? What is the next concern the customer has? And we're saying, okay, that is to do with automation. That is reducing the cost, increasing the speed, reducing the errors. So now we're automating and cost optimizing on the contracts. Third step is integrate. Now we do it across the entire organization. So once we have the internal automations in place, now we go cross organization, cross systems, single pane of glass, and we do it through an API. So this is a very specific direction where we are dictating towards the customer how we think they should produce value with our solution. And that is what the packaging does. This also creates a framework within which sales can then narrate the solution. Second example is from a German Series B startup I did. They were mostly actually US based and sold there. This is patient communication software. So doctor clinics talking to the patients. Again, in the gray box, that's tier 1, we solve patient communication. In the next one, we now automate it. So we reduce the cost, we increase the frequency, we start to use the system to create more and better communication than we had before, where we just had like a total mess of, yellow notes and phone slips and so forth. And then here in the third tier, we do practice growth. This is where we now take the communication and we use it to make sales. So we increase revenue and bookings and so forth, which is a very specific and directive way to use the packaging to tell the customer about an outcome that we think they're interested in. That was concept 5 on the expansion axis. Concept number 6, so the last one here, is what I call plug the revenue holes. So I'm going to illustrate this here. So if you have a solution and you have customers of different sizes, like some customers pay a little, some pay a lot, some are small, some are large, likely you're going to have some sort of a pricing metric if you're covering different types of contract sizes. And maybe let's say you have a price per user. And then what will happen is that the price per user or per unit that you're charging by is going to be quite high with the smaller customers. So maybe it's $100 per month per user. But then when the larger customers come through the door, you're going to give them a discount. So the price per user is going to drop. So I think I have an example here. Yeah. So let's say that it's $100 per user, 10 users, and it's just, $10 per user per month for 1,000 users. So you have this dynamic with large accounts and covering, let's say, mid-market and enterprise or SMB and enterprise, that the customer can increase 100x, 100 times in size, while the price, the contract value only increases 10 times, right? And I've actually worked with quite a few companies where, if the price only increases 10x, but the volume actually increases 100x, now the margins actually start to get a little bit compressed. So the large customers aren't as profitable as we would like them. So this is where we use packaging to what I call plug the revenue holes. So we need to realize that usually this is a scenario where we have some sort of core solution that we're delivering. Let's say we do whatever. Our software does optimization of salmon farming, or we do payroll software, whatever it is. Like, so either it's like a price per salmon or price per payroll or whatever it is that it does. But there is like some sort of core value proposition or job to be done that we have in the solution. That will be pressed on price regardless of what you do. And of course, you can say to your sales force, yo, you should just defend prices better and give less discount. That's fine. They probably should do that. But you also need to give them some ammunition to then monetize these larger customers. And step one actually usually is to just invent an enterprise tier. So if you look at most software solutions that have an enterprise tier, the enterprise tier is actually quite generic. Like if you have like salmon farming optimization software and you have HR payroll software, then the enterprise tier for both of these solutions probably something like advanced roles and permissions, audit trails, single sign-on, data retention, some sort of compliance, security related features. So enterprise usually isn't actually connected to the core solution that you do, but simply is the job of being a large organization. So it's something like, we want to do the optimization of the salmon or the payroll or whatever it is, but we're Deutsche Bank, so we're super large, so we actually need to do it in a certain way. And that is a specific job we have in order to use software. And that essentially is what the enterprise tier is. So just maturing that functionality and being very specific in selling and monetizing it can be a great way to having a higher revenue for these larger accounts. And of course, the smaller accounts are not buying it, so they're not affected by it. Next step in this is to roll out infrastructure costs, storage, API calls, sandboxes, environments, all these things that are sort of infrastructure related, usually also bought by enterprise customers, but not so much by small customers. So you stack this on top as well. And then finally, you add services, premium support, professional services, and so forth. So this creates this scenario where larger accounts have a very different, what I call revenue mix compared to smaller accounts. So small accounts, they just pay the $100 per user. That's fine. Larger accounts, they pay $10 per user, but they also pay $100K flat for the enterprise tier. They pay all the users-based cost and extra flat fees for the infrastructure. And then they pay premium support and different PS hours and so forth. And actually, that now makes the price point catch up to the size that they are. Okay, so that is it for the 6 concepts. I want to show you how I actually do the sketch packaging here. So the next, I think 10 slides or so they are anonymized, but they're from an actual client workshop that I did earlier this year for an inventory management system, where what I do is I get the right people in the room, right people being 3 to 5 people from the team, chief of product, chief of sales. If you have like a strategy officer or business development type person, get that person in there as well, maybe the CEO. And then you say, okay, our job is to align on the job to be done we're solving for the customer, the expansion access we have, the level of complexity we want, all of these things. And now the best way to do that is to just run through different examples and then evaluate them, realizing that none of them are going to be perfect, but we can find something that functions really well. Like it functions, sales like it, product like it, services like it, all these things. And then probably if we flesh that out and work with it properly, we can get to good packaging. So it might look something like this. Acme inventory, first suggestion is just to have a mono packaging where you say, well, all the functionality is just like in one block. You can buy that. And that is of course an option. That is minimal complexity. How would that work? And then you have the discussion, sales was like, probably nobody wants all the functionality, so they're going to ask for a lot of discounts. And maybe engineering thinks it is awesome because, it's super easy. There is no interconnection between different tiers, no feature toggling and so forth. So pros and cons. Okay, fine. Next version. Okay, now we actually start to split out the jobs to be done. We say, okay, so the inventory forecasting is a core job and reporting and so forth, but the ordering of new inventory is the second job that we're putting in a tiered model. Okay, great. Then we discuss that. How would that work? Do customers have demand for this? And so forth. And then Next version, we say, okay, maybe it's not the ordering. Maybe the ordering is actually part of the base, but now we do optimization as the next step. Is that optimization and cost reduction really? Is that something that there's specific demand for? Then you discuss that. And maybe you say, well, maybe it's both of these. Maybe it's the core solution and then the ordering and then the optimization now in a very specific expansion axis where we say, okay, so we actually want them to first get an overview, then they need to start the ordering, and then they need to be really cost efficient with their inventory. So now we're trying to sort of get a taste of what a certain prescription and point of view of our customers would be with this packaging. And then we go from there. Next one being, ordering goes back in the core tier, and now we invent the enterprise saying, hey, do we have customers that are large enough and we really need to monetize them this way? Question mark, that discussion. Finally, all four, full complexity, 4-tier model. How does that look? Too much? Maybe. Okay, well, at least we have the discussion, and then we can sort of roll back. Next one, now we start to do some add-ons and some services to say, okay, so maybe we have onboarding, maybe we have import of legacy data, maybe we have data connectors and Power BI dashboards. We know that we need to deliver these things, so why not spin them out very specifically, have that conversation in sale, and start talking about it. And of course, we can go from there, saying maybe we have an API access, maybe we have what I call a commercial SLA. Go to the services webinar and I'll explain what that is. And then premium support gets invented and so forth. Before we finally go into even more complexity where we say, hey, maybe we have store replenishment, which is a very specific retail feature. So now we're starting to segment customers a little bit, saying, hey, maybe wholesale and retail are different. We also take enterprise, and in this scenario, we're saying maybe we actually don't need it as a part of the expansion access. It just becomes an add-on. It's called enterprise compliance. Sits down here in one of the purple boxes, which would actually allow it to be bought as part of just the base package without buying the optimization. So this is a little bit with us testing whether that is easier sold as an add-on, maybe because it's a little light still on the functionality basis, or whether it should sit in the core expansion access in the tiered setup. And then finally, we can actually do a full fencing exercise where we say, hey, let's try and split wholesale and retail, and then have sort of the full complexity here. The idea with doing something like this is that we actually get to have the perspectives of each of these key people in the room on what the pros and cons would be on each of these packaging versions. And usually what happens is that you'll come up with an 11th or 12th one, and then you'll go from there, and then you'll co-create a packaging that really sort of fits all the different constraints and opportunities that different parts of the organization sees. So, and I haven't found any better way to do this. And usually it's a very fast and easy way to have that important high-level discussion about what kind of packaging you want and what really works. Okay, almost on time, guys. So it's 3:36. So we have about 25 minutes for Q&A. I see that the chat over here has been working pretty consistently. So I want to start sort of digging into some of the questions that have been posed here. I don't know if let me start by saying one thing. If I can't make all the questions, then there's hope. So this is what's going to happen. I will publish this webinar on YouTube. That's fine. And, you can always write me on LinkedIn, also just DM me, and I'll probably, I'll try to be as polite and as quick in answering you as possible. Also, for discussion, it's very much in beta mode. It's probably not going to be sort of fully functional until maybe the webinar next week. But I do have a community page live on school.com/SaaS pricing. So it's in beta mode. You can actually go there. You can sign up for the community. There's a forum. There's not a lot there, but you can be the first one to join and go in. And that's also where if we run out of time for questions, I will actually answer all questions related to the webinar in there. So if you have another question, go in there, post it, and I'll interact to my heart's delight. I shot it already. It's edited. It isn't live there, but in the next couple of days, I will actually post a free 5 hours that should scare you. There's like a 32 video, comprehensive walkthrough of everything that I just spent 30 minutes telling you. So it's I'm just going to go through platforms, modules, tiered features, all sorts of technical details, also how to sort of run the process. So I'm going to post that in there. It's totally free, so go and watch that. I'll also post this recording here and also all the next recordings. Okay, let's dig into some of the questions here. Let's see. Okay, Nadim says, how would you price and package a software solution that has base data costs? For example, the company charges a transactional cost of $10 per data retrieved for the customer. The cost of the company of this data is $3. There are now hard fixed costs to deliver the solution across the customer base. So whenever you have actual costs in delivery, you have what the choice really is about is whether to disclose it to the customer or not, right? And that usually has to do with the complexity that you have, right? So let's say your Netflix account, that probably has costs of delivery too, but Netflix doesn't want to charge you for the gigabytes that, you hammer their service with. So they're just giving you a fixed fee and say, hey, it's going to be whatever, $15 and that's it, right? So, but if you're selling something for, let's say, $1 million a year to an account, even let's say $100K a year, and you have actual infrastructure costs, splitting those out, very specifically showcasing them and say, hey, I have this digestion cost for the server, and then I have the storage cost and so forth. You need to pay that, can actually be, a very viable way to do pricing. I had the first time I sort of really cut my teeth on this, I had a 100 million insurtech company where we raised prices around 60% on that just by introducing infrastructure costs, just by asking all the customers to pay for storage, pay for API costs, pay for all the actual costs that were there, which actually, this is another sort of concept that we'll get into a little bit later on the other webinars, which is on wallet structuring, where instead of just loading the core budget of the business line of the customer, suddenly we tapped into the CIO budget, the IT budget of the corporation, and then we unlocked new budget power. And we did that by actually spinning out the infrastructure costs here. So Jesper, you're talking about a specific example. Just like write in the chat which example you mean, and I'll try to, because I don't understand which one you're referring to here. Michael says, how would you approach pricing for early stage startups? So depends on how early stage, right? So what I would say is that packaging comes before pricing, and it's probably actually more important. So it's a more important part of the monetization method. For early stage startups, 0 to $2 or $3 million AR, you have what I call the hustle phase, which basically is do what you can to make that 3 million a year and then clean up afterwards, right? So it's to the extent that you can, don't worry too much about having a very consistent model. Just try things out, because likely you're going to have something that works better than others, and just finding that is really going to be where the gold is. So that's it. But other than that, being very clear about your jobs to be done in the packaging, that's number one. And then, in the pricing webinar next week, I'll talk about finding value driving pricing metrics. And that's probably the second thing that I would focus on there. But that's it for the early stage startup. So hustle phase, and then very clear jobs to be done, and a single pricing metric that just rocks. Jordan says, how, if at all, is the concept of laddering different from packaging each job to be done? So packaging each job to be done just tells me that I need maintenance and operations. Laddering is the sequence that I put them in, right? So this has to do with the order. And so let's say that you don't want to have any order, then you essentially have a modular packaging, just saying, hey, you can buy each of these three in any combination that you want. You don't have to start with this and then do that. But if you have a very specific tiered model where you actually stack them on top of each other, now you have a very prescriptive way of saying to your customer, hey, we think you should buy it in this order. And we think the market is going to work in this way, where we start here and then we go here and then we go here. So it's that sort of concept of the expansion axis that really sort of builds the laddering, which is separate from that each package should solve a specific outcome. I hope that was clear. Okay, so Michael says, would it make sense to make structured pricing in case of early stage startup without a lot of customers and statistics to develop the pricing? Yeah, so a little bit back to, yes, you should do pricing. And should it be structured? Sure. Can you change the structure on a whim? Also sure, right? So really the objective for the first 1, 2, 3 million is to learn, right? So especially if you have larger contract sizes. So if you have, let's say, 25, 50K or more for each of your accounts, so you sell a little bit on the mid-market, so larger deals, that means that you actually have to talk to customers, you have to do business case work, you have to, you interact with them a lot, you have a lot of face time, and you have the opportunity to negotiate, suggest things, listen, make compromises. And all of that is part of it. That really kills structure, right? So the idea is that the first 3 million, you do whatever you can. If you sign 20 different contracts with 20 different pricing models, power to you. You reach 3 million. Good. From 3 to about 10 to 15, this is where you want to really log in on one model, where around 90% of new revenue is in this one model. But you have 10% still for experimentation and strategic accounts and whatever we call it, right? from 15 million and on, you should be locked in on one thing, right? So that's usually the 3 stages that I talk through in order to like, how much flexibility do you really want to give yourself? All right. I hope that was what you were asking about. Okay. Ali says, great presentation, Ulrik. Thank you. We're aiming for complex enterprise clients. However, until we get there, we will target SMBs. Okay. Classic move. Sure. How should we think about our pricing today to not get ourselves painted into a corner when we are ready to move to enterprise? Could you talk to us a bit about this? So I don't think I would worry too much about it. So one thing is that the packaging, just as I said, with the plug the revenue holes, will develop over time, right? So usually what happens is that it isn't that the core packaging you have is going to change. Maybe it is, right? But it's more so that it's going to have additions added to it, right? So it's like, whatever, we have the basic and the advanced tier, and then, in the future, we also have the enterprise tier. And then we start to have the specific like on-prem add-on or data center specificity, or we have the different environments that we sell. So all the infrastructure costs, and then you have all the service costs as well. So it's more so that these things get added when you need them in order to monetize these new larger accounts. So that's the one thing. On the pricing part, and I know this is a packaging webinar, but on the pricing part, my rule of thumb is that the net should be bigger than the fish, right? So, here's what I mean about that. So if you have a price list that says, pricing from 1 to 1,000 users, that's fine. But if someone walks through the door with 50,000 users, then your price list breaks down, right? So just make sure that your price list is always bigger than whoever walks through the door next, right? Because that will actually give you a structure to handle them within and negotiate with them within. So those are the two things. So packaging can develop a little bit over time, and pricing to a degree follows packaging. So if you come up with, let's say, infrastructure costs, then you need to create packaging for that. That's very specific. But also, of course, the price list just gets bigger as the customers gets bigger, but it should just get bigger in advance before you sell them. I hope that was enough of guidance for you, Ali. Okay. So Casper says, what signals or intents typically prompt a company to consider redesigning their packaging? So there can be a few. One could be, hey, we're coming up with some really net new product, right? I have a Dutch company that I'm probably going to start a project with now. They have like a very fine packaging, but now they're coming up with a new product that sits sort of at an earlier level of the value chain that they're in. So it's like, okay, how do we put this into the mix without like breaking what we have and really maximizing the opportunity and so forth? So net new product can really be an occasion to do this. The other occasion can be something like, we don't feel that we're monetizing our customers properly, right? So this could, for example, be that you haven't plugged the revenue holes and you just say, hey, we have these 100x customers that are just paying us 10x. And it just doesn't feel right. Like everybody can sort of sense that it's wrong, but we don't know how to negotiate with these guys because we just get our asses gets kicked whenever we try, right? And that can usually mean, hey, we actually need to go back, build the product structure up, plug the revenue holes, have something to sell them so that we actually can monetize. And then we can do the renegotiation and so forth, but on that basis. So I think those are and the third scenario would be M&A, where, hey, we just bought our competitor. Now we actually have 2 products and we need to have like a combined new whole where that is the case. But I think those are the 3 main occasions that I would mention. Okay. Steven says here, in your job to be done packaging example, describe, diagnose, predict, prescribe, do you run into challenges with only having one package option for each buying department? One school of thought is buyers like different options at different price points to choose from. If you assume each of those departments, maintenance, operations, and management, has their own budget and will make their own decision, then each team really only has one package to choose from. Have you ever experienced challenges with lack of options? Sure. This is a little bit where the complexity budget comes into play. I will say that the packaging sketch that was like, it was a sketch that you saw, but when fully sort of launched, it actually did wonders for Boimer Group, and they have had like it's a big internal success with how that product has done later. So don't necessarily think that options are good just as a matter of fact. Sometimes options are bad, right? Because now customers have to choose instead of just saying, hey, this is the right one for you. And what I would say is that if the option is to have maintenance done, let's say, well and perfectly, so there's the 2 options, that actually creates like a type of dissonance in the sale where customers say, well, of course I want it done perfectly, but now I need to figure out if the price difference between well and perfectly is sort of worth the added quality. And then they get into sort of this analysis paralysis where they can't really make a decision because it isn't obvious to them. So what I would usually say is that the options are better presented when you can really drill down into very discrete jobs to be done and saying, hey, maybe we can split maintenance into more jobs. But whether we should do that really has to do with the overall ticket size for the company, what kind of buying journey we want to have inside of that company and so forth. Because likely they are going to have some optionality around like how much of the PS volume, like professional services volume they want to have, what kind of integrations they want to have. Like there can be a lot of other choice factors that can flesh out the solution for these customers that is enough for them to feel that they can, let's say, configure the solution. So that is one part. The other part would be that since we're pricing the customer using two methods, packaging and pricing, even though we just have like for a very specific segment in the customer, just one package, like let's say maintenance, the pricing is still going to put a volume on that where we will differentiate maybe based on their usage. So they could say something like, hey, depending on whatever the data points and the machines that we hook up, we're going to pay more or less, right? So they can still scale pricing and maybe adopt more slowly, but within that functionality field, because we have these two parameters, packaging and pricing, that are both at work. So it's a little bit also with the interplay you have here that creates the options. Okay, I hope that was enough commentary here. So Nikhil says, for a B2B SaaS company in metadata, when the customer sophistication is low, I think it's a plug for another presentation this with around customer sophistication. Nice done, Nikhil. Okay. And when the metadata delivered is the same, but the customers derive different value from same data, how do you suggest we price the package? Because it will be either too expensive or too cheap. And 3, given the above, would you recommend a custom pricing? Because a customer-facing pricing page might not be a good idea. Okay, so I'm going to interpret this question a little bit to be the age-old vertical versus horizontal pricing play, right? So let's say that you have a solution and it could really work, create a lot of value for, let's say, 5 different segments. But, the 5 different segments are very different. Like one is whatever, chain restaurants and the other is banks, let's say. And chain restaurants, they're just like lower margin and, smaller and whatever. And banks are huge and make a lot of money, so they could pay more. But the solution is like fundamentally the same and customers will figure it out. So you're transparent by default. What do you do then? So you have 2 options. Either you'd really, really try to fence them. So you say, okay, so we're going to do everything we can in the product delivery and so forth to just create different fences. And then we're going to really separate them out. That's option 1. It can work. If you have 5 verticals, it starts to work less. I know that Zoom had 5 fences, but until you cross $1 billion in revenue, you probably shouldn't have 5. So it's not a sustainable way to do segmentation in that way, because it just adds too much complexity. So fencing is one thing. The other thing is to just say, hey, we're just going to go lowest denominator. So we're just going to sell to everyone at the pizza place price, and revenue, plugging revenue holes. We're now going to invent certain add-ons and products that are relevant for the bank. So let's say we create like a big compliance module. Maybe chain restaurants don't care too much about that, but banks care a lot. And then the compliance module is super expensive, right? Okay, so that could work. So you can actually solve a little bit in the packaging. And then, but it probably wouldn't be solved enough. So you would still have this real sense that you're under monetizing some of the customers, because not all of them are going to buy the add-on and so forth. The third option is to just not sell to the chain restaurants and just only sell to banks, and just turn yourself into a vertical software saying, hey, we're going to do metadata for banks because they have the big bucks and that's where the market is. And then you just center the solution around their outcome. So I think each of these can work. They have different obstacles. So they are hard in different ways. So it's really about sort of the particulars in your solution, the market size, and the sort of the growth speed and the access you have to pipeline in each of these verticals and so forth. But if you look at some like large horizontal softwares like Atlassian and sort of Azure and so forth, they're pretty much charging a pretty, they don't fence that much. They have like core functionality, same price for everyone, some add-ons are bought. So they're using what I called option 2 here. they're just plugging the revenue holes, but they're pretty much selling a horizontal solution across the market. Then you have someone here like Zoom that I just showed you. They're using the first, they're trying to do the fencing, and then others are just picking a specific vertical argument. So they actually just like refuse to answer the question, just pick the best type of customers and just sell to those. And most vertical software solutions that you find have made that choice in the past. So I think, let me break this down a little bit more. If you are a bootstrapped company, I would probably go with the best monetizable vertical that I could find and just go hardcore after those, because that's going to make the 0 to 5 or 10 million a lot easier. Just find one customer ICP, love them to death, sell them at the right price point, and that is. And if you're bootstrapped, having like a 10, 20, $30 million ARR machine is life-changing, right? If you're venture-backed, I would probably run with a horizontal solution and then try to plug the revenue holes as I grew and just figure it out, just sell at lowest denominator, push it out, and then invent product packaging for some of the customers that really like the compliance module I talked about, and that's it. And then maybe later, once I'm very late stage, I would run the fencing play that Zoom has. So I think if you just want like a clear direction on should I do A or B, look at your funding scenario and where you are and how your cap table looks and your balance sheet, and then choose based on what I just said. Your mileage may vary, but with the data I have, that's my advice. So we have a couple minutes left, and I can see that we're going to run out of time here. So again, when we run out of time, and so if your question didn't get answered, just like copy paste it, go to the school.com at SaaS-pricing, and then like sign up for an account. It's totally super free. I'll let you in if you're, anywhere remotely connected to B2B SaaS, and just post your question in there and I'll answer it. So hopefully we're going to have fun in that way. Okay. Berg says, how should we think about hardware-enabled software packaging and pricing, standardized but proprietary hardware configuration and key IP relying on software features? Okay. So I've done actually a lot of hardware plays, and I think it actually doesn't make a lot of difference. Of course, there is a cost component to hardware, there's the distribution component and so forth. But so that actually sometimes can help, because that means that you have a very concrete piece of iron or whatever machinery that the customer gets, that they're usually willing to pay for, because there's a large expectance to pay. It means that they think it's fair that you charge for delivering a thing. Where software still is a little ephemeral or airy, right? So it's like, why does this cost anything? Well, maybe it makes sense, but they're skeptical. But if you deliver like a box with a thing in it, there definitely has been cost on your side to deliver this thing to me, so I'm willing to pay for it. So actually, hardware can sometimes, if done properly, give you a lot of upfront cash flow that actually can make the model pretty well. Also, it gives you a lot of log-in, because now they have hardware, so they're not going to churn as much and so forth. So there's a lot of fundamentally very healthy dynamics in having hardware and software. So the trick then is to essentially, you have a few models, but my usual model would be you pay for the hardware and then you run a subscription on the software, the access on top of it. And then, if you stop paying the subscription, the hardware stops working, right? That would be the normal model. Sometimes if you have to go through resellers and distributors with the hardware and they're just box movers, you need to create versions where usually the serial number will activate. They go to a portal, they activate like a year's free license worth. And then after the 1 year free license, you have to sort of upsell them into sort of a recurring subscription on the hardware base. But that can be done, and I've done that multiple times in the past as well. So I just want to thank every one of you for showing up. I think I looked at it. I think we had, we're losing a little bit of people now, people going to the next meetings. I think we had 130, 40 people at the top end of the stream. I think we're at 89 now. I'm going to stay on for maybe 1 or 2 more questions, let's say to 10 past. And then we'll move over to the school.com community, where I'll also post the raw recordings of the webinar a little bit later today, along with the slides. And if there's any questions regarding the next webinars and so forth, that's also going to be the place here. So for now, I'm actually a little bit blown away that we got 130 people on this. So that was, for my part, a good experiment. I hope that you got your time's worth. That was my main goal for today. So I really appreciate you showing up, and for those of you that shared on social media and so forth, it's I notice. So thank you for that. Okay, so So that's going to be it for now. I'm going to stay on for 1 or 2 more questions, and then we're going to close off. But I know that a lot of you have to leave now, so that's of course fine. Right. VT asks, I'm sorry for the name pronunciations, guys. By the way, I'm probably getting half of them wrong. But VT says, great presentation. Thanks. Appreciate it. In context of good, better, best packaging discussion, I have often experienced that product and engineering teams are very focused on features, and it is hard to bring the discussion to value to customers. Do you have any tips for that? Yeah, so exactly. Don't focus on the features at all. Just focus on the jobs to be done and say what. So let's say the maintenance package. Let's say, can we agree that we should sell maintenance? And then whatever features we need to put into that, we should. And then product and engineering can figure that out later, as long as they solve for maintenance. And that sometimes needs a little bit of, let's say, project policing to make sure that they actually sort of stick to the original plan and so forth. But the idea is that you say, we need to connect from our sense of why it is we're doing this. That's the job to be done. From the product perspective, so that we can communicate on that high level with sales. So the sales says, okay, so if you're building X, we can talk about X. And then X needs to correspond to an actual outcome or problem in the world with the customer. And the customer say, I recognize X. X is a big problem. We spend millions of dollars on X every year, and I'm willing to pay you half of that if you can solve X for me, right? So that's the line of communication that you want all the way from product through sales to the customer's lived experience, for lack of a better word. And if you stay at that high level, because X, the job to be done, is so well defined from a product perspective in the sales motion, marketing and so forth, and in the customer's head, then it also gets very easy to price. It gets very robust. It stays over time and so forth. Now, features are then the answer to the follow-up question on, well, how do you do X, right? So, okay, X is great. I really like X. Great that you want to solve X for me. How do you do it? And then you can say, oh, we do X by, getting all the data into the system and, organizing it this way and giving you these workflows and whatever it is that the features actually are. But they almost serve as like a checklist that you're not bullshitting them. So it's like, oh, okay, I get it. Like, you can do X, right? Because you're just using the features to demonstrate that you know what you're talking about. And once they do sort of a deep dive on, is this it? Then you can go back up to talk about the job to be done. So that's sort of the high level. One more aspect here is that when we're talking about jobs to be done, there is a very distinct difference between whether we're talking about the job to be done of the user of the software or of the buyer of the software, right? And I know that I haven't sort of touched upon that aspect, but when we do packaging, we want to speak to the buyer of the software, because the buyer is the one that says, I am in charge of maintenance. I need to have that done, et cetera, right? And then usually the users, like the actual engineers on the customer side who will use the software and create value with it, they then say, oh, my boss is giving me this tool and, let's see if it's any good. And they will actually worry about the features. So what's going to happen is that if you just worry too much about the features, then you're going to speak to the not buyer. You're just going to speak to a user who can't actually sign off of the software. So you can almost consider the packaging on these two levels, where the major job to be done, which should also be like the sticker name of your package, speaks to the buyer. You have that conversation high level all the way from product through sales to the buyer, like this is the solution. And then the buyer, often that's how it works, will show his team, his subordinates, say, hey, I'm thinking about buying the solution. Will it work? And they will then drill into the features and essentially says, hopefully, like if it checks out and your product is good, they will say, sure, that will solve maintenance. So they will almost like checklist it to see if you're capable of living up to the job to be done. So you have this dynamic between user and buyer in the customer's organization that you want to be really specific about how you target, right? And the idea is that the job to be done is definitely for the buyer, and the feature is a little bit more for the users here. Okay, so we've been running for almost an hour and 10 minutes. I really, really appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn off the recording now. And so any questions that remain unanswered, if yours is still in there on the chat, go into the School community and post them. Or, if it's a private question in some way, just shoot me a DM on LinkedIn and I'll answer it there. Okay, thank you again. Take care, guys.